It all began on a quiet evening, the kind of evening that seems ordinary at first glance. The kind where you think nothing will happen, where the world is still, where even the loudest noises feel distant. But sometimes, the most life-altering moments occur precisely in such quiet. Imagine standing in the soft glow of a lamp, a cup of tea half drunk, the faint scent of a home you've built with someone you love, and then noticing something that stops your heart cold. That is the kind of evening Prince Harry experienced, and what he saw changed something deep inside him. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. You might wonder, what could possibly be so powerful, so emotionally charged, that it brought one of the most public figures of our time to tears, silently, without confrontation? The answer is deceptively simple: a ring. Not just any ring, a wedding ring, but not the one he gave her when they got married. The very ring that was supposed to symbolize their union, their promises, their shared future, absent. And in its place, something entirely unexpected. Harry had always been a man of visible emotion. He didn't hide his feelings easily, but he also didn't wear them as armor. He experienced love fully, with all the vulnerability it demanded. And on that night, standing before Meghan's jewelry box, he felt something unfamiliar. Confusion, disbelief, a profound sense of loss, and, above all, heartbreak. It wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal in the conventional sense. It was something more nuanced, more painful, the kind of sorrow that comes from realizing that reality doesn't match the story you've been living in your mind. Let's step back for a moment. Why does this story matter now? After all, the royal couple has been in the headlines for years. They've faced relentless scrutiny, media speculation, public admiration, and harsh criticism. They've moved continents, changed lifestyles, and redefined the rules of modern royalty. So why revisit this particular incident? Because objects have power, symbols have meaning, and sometimes a small, silent object can reveal truths that words never do. A ring isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's a marker of promises made, of personal and shared histories, of emotional investments that may be invisible to anyone else. In a marriage like Harry and Meghan's, under the weight of history, duty, and public expectation, a ring carries layers of significance. Its absence is not a minor oversight. Its presence, or the wrong presence, can illuminate entire emotional landscapes that were previously hidden. And that is precisely what Harry discovered. We are conditioned to think of discovery as an active process, a search, a confrontation, a reveal. But the truth is, sometimes the most revealing discoveries are passive, accidental, almost innocent in their inception. Harry wasn't snooping. He wasn't searching for evidence. He was simply interacting with the life he shared with Meghan, in a space that was meant to be intimate, safe, and private. And there it was. A ring that didn't belong, quietly nestled among the others, unassuming at first glance, but heavy with implication. Its presence demanded attention. Its meaning was impossible to ignore. What makes this moment so compelling is that it forced Harry into a confrontation not with Meghan, but with reality itself. How often do we come face to face with truths that we didn't want to see, that we weren't prepared to process? And yet, here he was, holding a tiny object that seemed to mock everything he thought he knew. A symbol he had chosen with care, love, and hope was missing. A symbol he had expected to anchor their union was nowhere to be found. And another symbol, one he did not recognize in the same context, had taken its place. You might ask yourself, why does it matter what ring was there or wasn't there? Because objects are more than objects. They carry stories. They carry intentions. They carry the residue of choices made in secrecy, in private, in moments that never see the light of public scrutiny. That ring was a statement, whether deliberate or subconscious. And Harry, for the first time, had to reckon with its silent, undeniable message. Imagine, for a moment, the swirl of emotions flooding his mind: confusion, nostalgia, longing, doubt, and yes, grief. Each one clashing against the other in rapid succession. He thought about the early days of their relationship. The excitement, the shared laughter, the quiet moments of understanding that felt sacred. And then he thought about the ring he had given her, the one that had been intended as a physical manifestation of his commitment, his presence, his love. And he realized painfully, that it had been replaced by something else, something that wasn't meant for him, or at least not in the way he imagined. Let's pause here and consider a larger question. Why do we attach so much weight to material objects in relationships? Why does a ring, a small loop of metal and stone, have the capacity to make someone weep? It's because symbols condense complex emotions into tangible form. They crystallize trust, loyalty, and memory into something our brains can process and our hearts can feel. And when a symbol is altered, absent, or substituted, it triggers a cascade of emotions. It's not the object itself. It's what it represents, what it signifies, and how it contradicts the story you've been telling yourself. Now, imagine that Harry's discovery did not happen in public. There were no cameras, no audience, no immediate commentary. It was private, intimate, and yet, the emotional impact was monumental. This is where curiosity meets empathy, because the story is not just about a ring. It's about human vulnerability, about the unexpected ways in which we confront truths about people we love, and about the silent moments that reveal more than shouting ever could. What did Harry do in that moment? The answer is both simple and complex. He cried, not in a dramatic, public display, not with anger or accusations, just tears, quiet, private, profound. They weren't tears of rage. They weren't tears of blame. They were tears of realization. Tears that acknowledged the complexity of love, of trust, and of disappointment. The kind of tears that come when the heart understands something the mind cannot immediately process. And here is where the real intrigue begins. The ring itself was shocking, yes, but it was only the first layer. Beneath it lay questions that Harry couldn't answer with certainty. Why was the ring there? Why was the one he gave her absent? Was this a remnant of a past life, a sentimental artifact, a message, or something more deliberate? And as he held the jewelry box, the weight of unspoken thoughts pressed down on him, heavier than any metal, sharper than any gemstone. This is where you, the audience, come in. You are invited into the story not as a passive observer, but as a witness to a private unraveling. Because Harry's discovery is compelling precisely because it is relatable. We have all faced moments in life where small, silent things reveal profound truths. A forgotten note, an unanswered call, an object that speaks volumes without uttering a word. And in that quiet confrontation, you see the human heart exposed in its purest form. Unguarded, questioning, fragile, and deeply emotional. By now, you might be wondering, what exactly was in that box? What story did the mysterious ring tell? Why did it cause such an emotional response? And perhaps most importantly, what came next? How did Harry process it? How did it affect his perspective on Meghan, on their marriage, and on himself? These questions will not be answered immediately. Instead, they form the tension that carries us through the story, the curiosity that keeps you leaning forward, the subtle ache that compels you to see how it unfolds. Because here's the truth, the ring was not the most disturbing part. The most revealing, most emotional, most transformative element was what it represented, the silent, almost imperceptible truths about relationships, about love, about trust, about identity, and about expectation. It forced Harry to look inward, to question assumptions, to confront feelings he may have ignored or suppressed. And that is what makes this story so universally gripping. As we move forward into the next chapters, we will explore not only the physical object itself, but also the emotional, psychological, and symbolic dimensions of what Harry found. We will examine the nature of attachment, the weight of symbolic gestures, the complexity of human relationships, and the ways in which a small, seemingly insignificant object can illuminate truths that were otherwise hidden in plain sight. But for now, pause and consider this. Sometimes, the heaviest things in life are the smallest things. Sometimes, the quietest moments hold the loudest revelations. And sometimes, a single object, a ring, can make a man weep, rethink, and confront realities he had never before imagined. And yet, as Harry stood there that evening, holding the jewelry box in his hands, there was one thought lingering in his mind, sharp and insistent. The ring was not just a ring. It was a message, and the message was clear. But what it truly meant, and what would come next, remained a mystery, waiting to be unraveled. The night had begun quietly, but by its end, Harry's understanding of love, trust, and intimacy had shifted forever. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Sometimes the most life-changing moments happen without warning. No fanfare, no alarms, no dramatic confrontation. Just quiet, ordinary life, until the ordinary is gone. That night, Prince Harry experienced one of those moments. He didn't know it at the time. He was simply moving through the familiar rhythm of home life, unaware that something small, silent, and intimate was about to fracture his world. Picture it. A late evening, the soft hum of lamps casting shadows across the room, a glass of wine resting on a nearby table. There was no tension in the air, at least not the kind you can name. No arguments, no disagreements, just the calm, private life he had chosen to create with Meghan. It was the sort of night where your mind drifts to minor details, a letter that needs signing, a message that went unanswered, the quiet laughter of someone in the next room. Harry was doing none of that consciously. He was simply in the space he knew and trusted. And then he saw it. The jewelry box. A small, unassuming container that had, for years, held intimate fragments of life. Memories of anniversaries, gifts exchanged, the subtle symbolism of personal choices. Most people would never give it a second thought. For Harry, it was a repository of history, affection, and trust. And yet, as he opened it that night, something stopped him cold. The air seemed to thicken. A simple object lay inside, quietly demanding his attention. At first glance, it was just another piece of jewelry. Nothing unusual about that. But the closer he looked, the more the subtle differences became glaring. There was a ring, not the one he had given her on their wedding day. And yet it occupied the most prominent spot, as if claiming the space that belonged to another. It was a quiet, small defiance, yet it carried weight. Harry's mind raced. Why was it there? Why wasn't the ring he had chosen and given her worn or displayed? And then the realization settled in, slow and heavy. This wasn't merely an oversight. This was a signal. Something he hadn't anticipated. Something that, in the stillness of that moment, felt like an emotional earthquake. Harry did not immediately react with anger. That came later, if at all. For now, it was confusion, bewilderment, a need to understand, to process, to reconcile what he saw with what he thought he knew. He felt a surge of questions. When had this been placed here? How long had it been hidden? Was it deliberate? Sentimental? Innocuous? Or something else entirely? And as he stared, the layers of meaning began to multiply. Rings are symbols. They are condensed stories of love, trust, and commitment. They are markers of union and shared history. And yet, here was one that contradicted the narrative he had assumed. Its presence whispered secrets that words had never revealed, secrets that tore at the edges of understanding. Imagine the mental whirlpool. A single glance at a small object triggered years of emotion. Memories of their courtship, their wedding, the early days of laughter and shared vulnerability. He thought about the late-night conversations, the intimate smiles, the promises whispered in private. And now, this ring, quietly occupying a space that should have belonged to another, disrupted all of it. He could almost hear the silent questions pressing on him. What does this mean? Did she forget? Did she move on in a way he hadn't noticed? Is it a statement, or simply an object? And the hardest question of all, why hadn't he seen it sooner? It was in that silence that the weight of emotion struck him. Not rage, not accusation, but sorrow. Tears that came quietly, without preamble, as if acknowledging that the heart knows some truths before the mind can articulate them. The jewelry box, the ring, the absence of the wedding ring. All of it became a mirror reflecting the complexities of love, trust, and expectation. The human mind is remarkably adept at finding patterns. Harry could not help but search for meaning. Perhaps it was sentimental, a keepsake from another time. Perhaps it was an item of personal significance, a relic he had never been meant to understand. Or perhaps it was deliberate, a subtle declaration of independence, a boundary he had not recognized. Each possibility was plausible, yet none brought comfort. Each one demanded reckoning. And as he wrestled with these thoughts, he began to feel something he had not anticipated. A mixture of grief and disbelief, laced with a sharp edge of introspection. It wasn't just about the ring. It was about what it represented. A truth about their life together that had never been explicitly spoken, yet had existed all along, hidden in plain sight. And suddenly, everything seemed to shift. The ordinary evening, the familiar surroundings, the sense of normalcy, it all felt fragile, uncertain, almost unreal. Harry tried to place the object back into perspective. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was simply a piece of jewelry with sentimental value he had misunderstood. Yet every instinct he had told him otherwise. Objects carry weight beyond their physical form, especially when they intersect with human emotion. This one was a symbol, and symbols demand attention. They provoke thought, elicit feelings, and force confrontations we might otherwise avoid. In that moment, he realized the enormity of the situation. Not in the sense of scandal or betrayal, but in the sense of revelation. The ring revealed a dimension of his life with Meghan that had been quietly hidden, a dimension that made him question assumptions he had never challenged. It was a confrontation with subtle truth, with nuanced emotion, with the silent undercurrents of their relationship. You might think it's dramatic to assign such weight to a small object, but think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever found something? A letter, a photograph, a gift, and felt the world shift around you in an instant? Harry's experience was similar, amplified by the stakes of public life and personal commitment. And as he stood there, silent and still, he felt the full spectrum of emotional impact: confusion, longing, grief, and an aching need to understand. It's important to note that this was not a moment of confrontation. He did not yell. He did not accuse. He did not even speak immediately. He simply absorbed. And in absorbing, he began to see patterns, possibilities, and questions he could not unsee. The jewelry box, which had once been a container of private life, became a prism reflecting the hidden complexities of his relationship. And as the night wore on, the emotional intensity did not fade. It lingered, subtle but persistent, like a shadow that refuses to dissipate. Every thought, every memory, every silent reflection brought him back to that single object, the ring that should not have been there. It was more than metal and stone. It was a message, a revelation, a spark that ignited a chain reaction of thought, emotion, and reflection. By the end of the evening, Harry's perception of his marriage, of intimacy, and of shared trust had shifted. What seemed ordinary had become extraordinary. What seemed private had become revealing. And as he placed the jewelry box back in its usual spot, there was a lingering sense of unresolved tension, a sense that the night had begun quietly, but would end with consequences he could not yet comprehend. And yet, this was only the beginning. The discovery of the ring was a doorway, a small but powerful entry point into a deeper story. Questions had been raised that demanded answers. Emotions had been stirred that would not settle easily. And most importantly, a private moment of quiet revelation had set the stage for events and realizations that would follow, each one carrying the potential to reshape not just Harry's understanding, but the narrative of their life together. What Harry did not know in that moment was that the ring was only the first signal, the first whisper of a series of truths that would unfold with increasing intensity. And as he left the room that night, the image of the jewelry box lingered in his mind. Its contents were small, yet their significance loomed large. A ring is small, unassuming, almost delicate. A thin circle of metal, a simple setting, perhaps a single stone. At first glance, it seems minor, almost trivial. And yet, for those who understand human relationships, it carries weight far beyond its size. A wedding ring is more than ornamentation. It is a symbol, a contract, a promise condensed into metal and stone. And the absence or misplacement of that symbol can trigger emotions as intense as any spoken argument, any betrayal, any dramatic confrontation. Think about it. Why do we give rings at all? Why, across centuries and cultures, do we take a small object, loop it around a finger, and declare it sacred? Because objects make abstract emotions tangible. Love, commitment, fidelity, devotion, these are concepts that are hard to grasp. But hold a ring in your hand, slide it onto a finger, see it reflected in light, and suddenly the intangible becomes concrete. You can touch it, feel its weight, wear it, show it, and in doing so, you affirm something deeply human: the choice to connect, to belong, to be bound. For Harry and Meghan, a royal wedding amplified this symbolism exponentially. A ring wasn't just a personal token of love. It was a signal to the world. It was a public affirmation of private commitment. Every detail mattered. The design, the origin of the stones, the placement on the hand, the gestures surrounding it. A wedding ring in their context is a declaration, a statement, a reflection of identity. To alter it, to misplace it, or to replace it is not merely a personal decision. It is an action loaded with implications, emotional and symbolic. And yet, people often underestimate the power of these small symbols. We assume that the real depth of a relationship is communicated through words, through shared experiences, through dramatic gestures. But the truth is subtler. The symbols we choose, and those we abandon, often speak louder than anything we can articulate. A ring can speak of devotion or of distance. It can communicate inclusion or separation. It can reveal care or hint at indifference. And sometimes, it can do all of these things at once, leaving the observer, in this case, Harry, grappling with multiple interpretations simultaneously. Consider the emotional mechanics at play. Harry had invested in this ring emotionally. Every choice in its design, every detail in its creation, was imbued with intention. It was not merely a ring. It was a manifestation of thought, love, and personal energy. To discover it absent, and to see another ring in its place, is to confront a contradiction. The physical evidence of devotion is missing, yet another symbol occupies the space. What does that communicate? Intentionality? Forgetfulness? Nostalgia? Defiance? Love expressed differently? The mind struggles to parse the correct answer. The heart reacts first, long before clarity arrives. Wedding rings also act as anchors for memory. They are time capsules. The moment you place a ring on someone's finger, you tie it to a specific instant. Vows spoken, promises made, hearts opened. They carry the emotional residue of that moment, the excitement, the joy, the nervous anticipation. When that ring is absent or replaced, the anchor lifts. Memory shifts. You are left floating, untethered, questioning what has remained constant and what has changed. And in relationships like Harry and Meghan's, this symbolism is magnified. Their lives are lived under public scrutiny, where every detail is noticed, analyzed, and dissected. A missing or replaced ring does not remain private for long. Observers notice, speculate, and interpret, often without the full context. For Harry, this is a double-edged sword. The personal meaning of the ring is profound, yet the public interpretation adds layers of complexity he cannot escape. The absence becomes a mirror reflecting not only personal doubts, but perceived social narratives. But let's step into the psychology of attachment for a moment. People form emotional bonds with objects because they embody shared experiences. Rings, particularly wedding rings, are physical repositories of shared history. They hold stories that words alone cannot contain. When Harry realized the ring he gave Meghan was not there, he wasn't merely observing a misplaced object. He was witnessing the absence of a shared story, a pause in the continuity of emotional history. And the replacement ring? That too carried a story, one he didn't fully understand, but one that implicitly demanded recognition. Now consider the tension between public symbolism and private meaning. In Harry and Meghan's world, public perception is critical, yet private reality is where intimacy and vulnerability live. The missing wedding ring straddles both spheres. Publicly, it could be seen as inconsequential. Perhaps Meghan chose a different ring for fashion or personal taste. Privately, it is seismic, shaking the foundation of trust, expectation, and emotional security. The discrepancy between these spheres creates cognitive dissonance. The mind wants to reconcile what it sees with what it believes should exist. But the heart experiences confusion, sorrow, and even fear before reconciliation occurs. What's remarkable is that such a small object can provoke such profound reflection. One ring, one thin band of gold, can prompt questions that ripple across the entirety of a relationship. How well do you know each other? How much trust exists? Are there unspoken boundaries, unseen attachments, or hidden pasts that influence the present? Can love endure subtle signals of misalignment? The ring becomes a lens through which all these questions are magnified, scrutinized, and emotionally amplified. It's also worth noting the cultural and historical significance of rings in royal relationships. A royal wedding ring is not merely personal, it is historical. Every detail reflects centuries of tradition, expectation, and social symbolism. To change, hide, or replace a ring is to engage, consciously or unconsciously, with layers of meaning far beyond the personal sphere. For Harry, understanding this was critical. He had inherited a complex web of expectations, symbolic gestures, and unspoken rules. The jewelry box, seemingly innocent, had become a site where personal, historical, and emotional narratives intersected. But let's not overlook a fundamental truth. The emotional weight of a ring is ultimately subjective. Its significance is defined by those who invest it with meaning. Harry's tears were not caused by the metal or stone itself. They were caused by the rupture in narrative, the quiet confrontation with uncertainty, the emotional discrepancy between intention and reality. And the mystery ring, occupying the space of the absent one, acted as both a mirror and a lens, reflecting hidden truths and magnifying them. It is here that the story deepens. When a symbol like a wedding ring is altered, intentionally or not, it forces reflection on broader relational dynamics. What unspoken patterns exist? What compromises have been made silently? What emotional distances have widened without acknowledgement? A single object can catalyze an awareness of gaps in intimacy that words may never reveal. And for Harry, the jewelry box, the absent ring, and the replacement ring were not trivialities. They were touchstones of realization, gateways to understanding dimensions of his marriage he hadn't fully explored. You might ask, could this have been an innocent oversight? Perhaps. People misplace objects, make choices without forethought, or keep sentimental items for private reasons. But context matters. The quiet setting, the prominence of the replacement ring, the emotional weight of the absent one. All of these factors coalesce to create a moment of profound emotional impact. This was not a trivial misplacement. It was a revelation wrapped in subtlety, an event that forced reflection, even if no conversation had yet occurred. And therein lies the paradox. Harry faced an emotional truth in the smallest of details. A single ring, barely larger than a coin, challenged assumptions, elicited grief, and demanded introspection. The physical object was tiny, but its significance was monumental. And as he stared at the jewelry box that night, the layers of meaning expanded in his mind. Personal history, symbolic resonance, emotional expectation, public perception. Each layer deepened the impact, each insight added weight. As we continue this story, remember this. The discovery of the ring was not simply a personal moment. It was a prism reflecting multiple truths, a mirror showing the intersection of love, expectation, and reality. It was an entry point into questions Harry had never fully asked, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest things hold the greatest power. And yet, the ring alone was only the beginning. What Harry would realize next? About Meghan, about himself, and about the nature of symbols and attachment, would challenge his understanding even further. The jewelry box had opened more than just a container that night. It had opened a door into the complexities of human emotion, trust, and the silent narratives that shape relationships. Every marriage has its defining moments. The first glance across a crowded room, the shared laugh at an inside joke, the quiet conversation that stretches into the night. But some moments are crystallized in objects, small, tangible symbols that carry the weight of emotion. For Harry and Meghan, that object was the wedding ring he had given her. He had chosen it with intention, with care, with a depth of thought few could imagine. Every detail mattered. The metal, the cut of the stone, the symbolism behind its design. It was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a promise made tangible, a reflection of love and commitment. Imagine for a moment the emotional energy poured into a single object. Harry, like anyone in love, had wanted that ring to be perfect. It wasn't about extravagance or public perception. It was about intimacy, the private understanding that this ring would serve as a constant, visible reminder of a bond he considered sacred. And yet, as he stood before Meghan's jewelry box that night, it was nowhere to be found. Not on her hand, not in the usual place. It had disappeared into silence, leaving only questions behind. The absence of the ring was jarring. It wasn't theft, not in the conventional sense. It wasn't hidden to cause pain, but its absence spoke volumes. It communicated a dissonance between expectation and reality, between the narrative Harry had constructed in his mind and the life they were living together. One can argue that rings are just symbols, that love exists beyond the metal on a finger. But symbols are powerful precisely because they embody intention, recognition, and memory. And when a symbol vanishes, it leaves a vacuum. Harry likely replayed the memory of giving that ring countless times in his mind. The moment they exchanged vows, the anticipation, the nervous joy, the profound relief of mutual commitment, all crystallized in that small circle of gold. To realize that it was no longer present in the way he expected would be destabilizing for anyone, even someone accustomed to life under intense scrutiny. The ring had been a tactile assurance, a signifier of love that had been assumed to be constant. And now, its absence demanded attention, reflection, and emotional reckoning. The human brain is wired to search for patterns, for explanations. Harry's mind likely raced. Had she misplaced it? Perhaps she preferred another ring, or there was a practical reason for its absence. Maybe it was safe elsewhere, kept for sentimental reasons. Or, perhaps, it was not about the object at all, but what it represented: commitment, shared identity, and connection, and the replacement ring hinted at a shift in perspective. Every possible explanation carried a different emotional weight, some comforting, others deeply unsettling. Consider the intimacy of giving a ring. It is not just the act of gifting an object. It is the act of creating a shared narrative. Every time Harry had seen Meghan wear it, he was reminded of the trust and affection binding them. Every public moment where it shone on her finger, every quiet glance in private, reinforced the invisible threads of connection. The absence of the ring disrupted this feedback loop. It was not merely a physical gap. It was an emotional and symbolic one. And then there was the replacement ring. Its existence complicated the narrative further. It was not merely a neutral object occupying empty space. It carried significance. Perhaps it was nostalgic, connecting Meghan to a different time or personal memory. Perhaps it was chosen for aesthetic preference. Or perhaps it served as a subtle, unspoken statement of identity, autonomy, or emotional boundaries. Harry, confronted with this, would have to navigate multiple interpretations simultaneously, each carrying potential implications for his understanding of their relationship. The psychology here is profound. We often underestimate how much emotional resonance we attach to objects, especially in intimate relationships. Harry's reaction, a mixture of confusion, sorrow, and quiet reflection, is rooted in this principle. Objects serve as touchstones for memory, markers of emotional investment, and symbols of relational dynamics. When one object vanishes and another appears, the mind struggles to reconcile the gap, interpreting significance where none may have been consciously intended, yet feeling the impact deeply nonetheless. There is also the interplay of public expectation. For Harry and Meghan, a missing ring is not just a private concern. Every detail is subject to public analysis. Observers notice shifts, speculate on intent, and assign meaning. In this context, the absence of the ring is magnified. What might be a minor domestic choice for a private couple becomes a narrative thread examined, dissected, and interpreted by millions. The emotional stakes are elevated, and the symbolic weight of the ring grows heavier. Harry likely felt a mixture of grief and disbelief. The absence of the ring triggered reflection not just on the object itself, but on the trajectory of their relationship. It raised questions about intimacy, alignment of values, and unspoken dynamics. It demanded introspection. Had he overlooked subtle signs? Had he misread signals? Was this a moment of unconscious communication from Meghan, or merely coincidence? The mind, confronted with ambiguity, seeks resolution. The heart reacts to potential loss and perceived disconnection before clarity emerges. But here's the paradox. The physical ring was gone, yet its presence was more powerful than ever. In absence, it dominated attention. In silence, it demanded meaning. In the private theater of Harry's mind, the missing ring became a catalyst for reflection, a mirror showing gaps and nuances in their shared narrative. It was a starting point, not the conclusion. And that is why this moment matters so profoundly. The wedding ring Harry gave Meghan was a symbol he invested with love, thought, and intention. Its disappearance, coupled with the appearance of another ring, created a tension that could not be ignored. It forced a confrontation with reality, a reflection on unspoken dynamics, and a reckoning with the fragility and complexity of shared life. As Harry stood before the jewelry box, emotions surged. The mind catalogued possibilities, the heart processed absence, and the body responded with a quiet ache. Tears came not from anger, but from recognition. Love and trust are delicate. Symbols carry profound weight, and sometimes the most meaningful revelations arrive in the smallest packages. The ring was more than metal and stone. It was a tangible measure of relational alignment, a signal, and a question all at once. And yet, even as he processed the absence of the ring he had given, he could not help but wonder about the intentions behind the one that remained. Was it a sign of attachment to the past? A private memory? A subtle assertion of autonomy? Each possibility carried implications he had never anticipated. The jewelry box had become a repository not merely of objects, but of complex emotional truths, some visible, some hidden, all demanding recognition. By the end of the night, Harry's understanding of his relationship had shifted, subtly yet profoundly. The ring he gave Meghan was no longer merely a token. Its absence had become a symbol of questions, introspection, and emotional realignment. And as he left the room, the image of that jewelry box lingered in his mind, small, ordinary, and yet extraordinary in impact. But this was not the conclusion. The ring he gave was gone, replaced by another. Yet the deeper story, the emotional, psychological, and symbolic consequences of that discovery, was just beginning. The journey of understanding, of interpretation, and of emotional navigation lay ahead, and it would challenge everything Harry thought he knew about love, trust, and connection. Some objects appear ordinary until you realize they carry a story you weren't meant to see. A small piece of jewelry, a photograph, a note tucked into a drawer, these are not merely items. They are vessels of memory, emotion, and sometimes revelation. For Prince Harry, that evening was defined by one such object, a ring that shouldn't have been there. It was subtle at first, a glint in the jewelry box, a familiar shape but an unfamiliar presence. At a glance, it might have seemed like a decorative choice, a sentimental token, or simply another accessory. But Harry's instincts, honed by a lifetime of navigating complex emotional landscapes, public scrutiny, and personal stakes, recognized immediately that this was not just a ring. It was a message, and messages rarely arrive without weight. This ring was unlike any he had given her. Its design was different, perhaps from another era, perhaps with origins he did not recognize. There was something in its very presence that made the familiar environment of the jewelry box feel foreign, almost unsettling. Harry's gaze lingered. Something about the way it was positioned, the way it occupied the space, felt deliberate. Yet there was also ambiguity. Was it placed there with conscious intention, or had it simply found its way into the box through habit, sentiment, or memory? The uncertainty only amplified the emotional intensity. Objects have a way of revealing more than words can. The ring's existence in that space provoked a cascade of thoughts. What does it signify? Was it a token from the past, something that connected her to an earlier life? Was it a silent assertion of autonomy, a statement of independence within the bounds of their marriage? Or was it simply a cherished memory, kept in private, with no intention of causing reflection, let alone heartache? Harry did not yet have answers. What he had was a stirring sense that the ordinary had shifted, that the familiar had been disrupted. The psychology of keeping objects is fascinating. Humans are drawn to material anchors, small pieces that preserve memory, emotion, or identity. Rings, in particular, are powerful. They are portable, visible, and intimate. They can signify love, remembrance, loyalty, or even distance. In Harry's case, the appearance of this ring created a profound cognitive dissonance. One part of him understood it could be sentimental, another part perceived it as a quiet statement, and yet another part wrestled with the emotional implications of a symbol he could not fully interpret. And so, the ring sat there, small, unassuming, yet monumental in its impact. It forced Harry to confront questions he had not been prepared to ask. How much of our shared life is shaped by choices we do not fully understand? How much of our love is defined by symbols, and how much by action? And most importantly, how do you reconcile the tangible presence of an object with the intangible weight of its meaning? There was also the emotional layering to consider. The ring was not merely an object of past memory. It was a catalyst for present reflection. Harry found himself replaying moments, memories of courtship, private gestures, shared confidences, and considering how this single object intersected with them. The jewelry box, once a repository of shared history, now became a mirror reflecting unspoken truths and potential tensions. Each glance at the ring sparked a mental survey, emotional bonds, commitments, potential misunderstandings. The object was small, but the implications were vast. Curiosity, naturally, surged alongside confusion. Harry could not resist examining the ring closely, trying to understand its design, its origin, its significance. Perhaps it was a keepsake from before their marriage, something she had held on to from another chapter of her life. Perhaps it was a deliberate choice to keep the past present in a way that he had not anticipated. Perhaps it symbolized something entirely personal, hidden in plain sight. And the absence of explanation only intensified the emotional resonance. There is a subtle tension in discovering such objects. The emotional curiosity clashes with caution. Do you ask questions? Do you confront? Do you let it be and risk leaving the meaning unresolved? Harry, aware of both personal and public implications, was likely caught in that exact tension. His desire to understand wrestled with his instinct to preserve harmony. And so, the room remained quiet, the ring remained in its place, and the questions multiplied silently. What makes this ring extraordinary is not its physical attributes, but its symbolic weight. It was an object that existed independently of intention, yet demanded interpretation. Every glance, every moment of reflection, layered meaning upon meaning. Its presence created a narrative that Harry could not ignore, a narrative of personal history, emotional complexity, and relational ambiguity. In that small, private moment, a universe of questions had been opened, each demanding consideration, each challenging assumptions. Imagine standing in such a moment. The ordinary familiarity of home, replaced by tension you cannot fully name. The jewelry box, once an innocuous container of personal items, transformed into a site of emotional excavation. The ring, small, metallic, delicate, yet immense in significance, sat there quietly, commanding attention without sound. And as Harry considered it, the emotional landscape shifted beneath him. What had seemed simple, secure, and understood suddenly felt fluid, uncertain, and laden with significance. Harry's mind, naturally reflective and emotionally acute, began exploring possibilities: attachment, memory, symbolism, autonomy. Each thought branched into questions about love, trust, and intimacy. He could not know whether this ring was a conscious statement or a simple memento. But its existence forced recognition, compelled consideration, and demanded reflection. And then came the emotional spike, the quiet, private ache of realization. This was not merely about missing jewelry. This was about perception, expectation, and interpretation. The ring's presence implied choices, conscious or unconscious, that Harry had not anticipated. It raised questions about alignment, communication, and shared understanding. It was a reminder that even in love, uncertainty can exist, and even in commitment, interpretation matters. The night stretched on, and the emotional weight of the discovery persisted. Harry felt the complexity of human relationships crystallized in a single object. How often do we underestimate the influence of symbols in our lives? How often do we overlook the power of an item to convey meaning without uttering a single word? That night, Harry realized that the jewelry box, the small, quiet container of memories and objects, had become a crucible for understanding, a lens into hidden dynamics, and a mirror reflecting unspoken truths. The ring that shouldn't have been there had done more than provoke curiosity. It had illuminated aspects of love, trust, and connection that were difficult to confront. It was small, silent, yet profoundly influential. And as Harry held it in his mind, turning the possibilities over, he knew one thing. the story of this object was far from over. Its presence would echo in thoughts, reflections, and interactions in ways he could not yet predict. Because in relationships, the smallest objects often carry the largest truths. And the truth this ring whispered was only the beginning of the emotional journey Harry was about to undertake. Everyone carries pieces of their past into the present. Some of them are visible, photographs, letters, keepsakes. Others are invisible, memories, regrets, hopes, and fears. But sometimes, the past insists on being tangible, and the objects left behind, small, ordinary items, become reminders of chapters that were never fully closed. For Prince Harry, the mysterious ring in Meghan's jewelry box was one of those reminders. It wasn't merely a piece of jewelry. It was a fragment of a past story that had somehow intertwined with their present, demanding recognition, reflection, and emotional reckoning. To understand the weight of that ring, it's essential to consider the human tendency toward attachment. We form emotional bonds not just with people, but with objects, places, and symbols. These attachments anchor memories and feelings, keeping them alive across time and distance. Sometimes, these bonds are innocent: a childhood toy, a letter from a friend, a gift from a long-lost relative. Other times, they are more complex, layered with unfinished stories, unresolved emotions, or silent regrets. In Meghan's case, the ring represented more than style or sentimentality. It carried the echoes of a life that existed before her marriage to Harry, a life full of experiences, relationships, and choices that had shaped her identity. For Harry, the discovery of the ring was both intimate and unsettling. It was intimate because he was witnessing a private aspect of Meghan's inner world, a side she had not openly shared. It was unsettling because it hinted at unfinished narratives, emotional histories that had persisted quietly alongside their shared life. Humans often underestimate how much power the past wields, especially when it manifests physically in objects we encounter daily. A ring, after all, is not just a circle of metal, it is a vessel of memory. It is history, intention, and identity condensed into a form that cannot speak, but which communicates in profound silence. As Harry examined the ring, he likely considered its origin. Was it a gift from someone significant in Meghan's life? Was it a relic of a chapter she had hoped to preserve privately? Or was it a personal talisman, a symbol of resilience, independence, or growth? Each possibility carried emotional weight. Each carried potential meaning he had never anticipated. And yet, he could not fully understand it. Not yet, at least. The ring, in its quiet presence, forced him to confront the fact that love is not only about the present moment. It is also about acknowledging and integrating the pasts each partner brings into the relationship. This realization can be jarring. Love is often idealized as complete, immediate, and consuming. We imagine that our partner's world becomes entirely shared, that their past dissolves into the narrative we are building together. But the truth is more complicated. People are products of time, experience, and circumstance. Objects from the past, like this ring, serve as tangible reminders of what came before. They are not inherently threatening, yet they can disrupt the illusion of total intimacy, forcing reflection and dialogue. For Harry, the presence of the ring may have stirred feelings of vulnerability. To see a part of Meghan's history manifested so clearly, so visibly, could trigger self-doubt, curiosity, and even fear. Was there something unresolved between her and this object? Did it represent choices or relationships that Harry had not fully understood? Was it a signal of personal priorities or identity that differed from his assumptions? These questions, swirling simultaneously, could easily overwhelm anyone in a deeply emotional state. And yet, for someone like Harry, who is both emotionally attuned and constantly navigating public scrutiny, the stakes were higher. Humans also have a unique ability to project meaning onto objects, particularly when those objects intersect with personal emotions. The ring, small and silent, became a canvas onto which Harry unconsciously mapped a range of interpretations. It could signify independence, attachment, or memory. It could suggest loyalty to the past or unresolved longing. It might even reflect autonomy within the context of their shared life. Each interpretation carried potential consequences for how he understood Meghan, how he understood their marriage, and how he understood himself. And then there is the emotional layering. The ring was not isolated in significance. It interacted with Harry's own experiences, memories, and expectations. He had entered the marriage with hopes of mutual support, shared history, and symbolic affirmation of love. The absence of the ring he gave her and the presence of another created a dissonance between expectation and reality. In one sense, it was a minor, almost trivial observation. In another, it was an invitation to confront the silent complexities of identity, attachment, and shared life. It is also important to consider how unfinished stories affect intimacy. Every person carries unspoken narratives, decisions, memories, experiences that have shaped them but remain unarticulated. In most relationships, these stories are acknowledged through conversation, shared understanding, or mutual empathy. But objects like the mysterious ring bypass dialogue entirely. They communicate subtly, indirectly, through presence and symbolism. For Harry, this meant that Meghan's past was asserting itself without words, demanding recognition, and challenging assumptions about the completeness of shared life. The night likely became an emotional minefield. Harry, sensitive to both his own feelings and the potential implications of the ring, would have felt a mix of curiosity, sorrow, and introspection. What was innocent? What was deliberate? What did this object reveal about identity, values, or relational dynamics? He was confronted not only with the tangible presence of a ring, but with the invisible emotional landscape it illuminated. The jewelry box had transformed from a container of simple objects into a repository of relational insight, and perhaps of tension. And yet, even as questions multiplied, the ring's presence demanded patience, observation, and reflection. It was a reminder that not all truths arrive with clarity. Some truths must be discovered, interpreted, and internalized over time. Harry's tears were not just for the missing ring he had given. They were also for the complex reality of love itself, for the recognition that intimacy is never as simple as it appears, and that attachment is never free from the shadows of the past. In reflecting on this moment, it becomes clear that the ring was more than a symbol of past attachment. It was a lens into unfinished stories, unspoken histories, and emotional currents that had persisted quietly alongside their shared life. It forced Harry to consider how the past intersects with the present, how objects carry meaning beyond their physical form, and how love requires navigating both visible and invisible layers of experience. The evening concluded without confrontation. The ring remained in the jewelry box, small and unassuming, yet monumental in significance. It had sparked questions, emotions, and reflections that could not be easily resolved. Its presence would echo in Harry's mind, shaping interpretations, emotional responses, and relational understanding for days, weeks, and perhaps longer. But even this realization, that the ring represented past attachments and unfinished stories, was only part of the journey. The layers beneath it, the choices it symbolized, and the emotional truths it revealed were still waiting to be explored. What Harry would come to understand next would challenge his assumptions even further, and the implications would extend far beyond a single, silent object. Objects communicate, often in ways words cannot. Jewelry, in particular, carries layers of meaning, transmitting messages silently, subtly, yet profoundly. A ring can speak of love, commitment, memory, or independence. A necklace can whisper nostalgia, loyalty, or even rebellion. For Prince Harry, the mysterious ring in Meghan's jewelry box was more than decoration. It was a silent message, a wordless communication that carried emotional weight far beyond its size. Harry had long understood that relationships are built not only on spoken promises, but on symbolic acts and tangible markers of connection. The wedding ring he had given Meghan had represented his commitment, his love, and his intent to honor their bond. Its absence and replacement by another ring disrupted that symbolism, creating a conversation without words, a communication that demanded interpretation. Think for a moment about how humans decode silent messages. A glance, a gesture, or the placement of an object can convey meaning. We are wired to notice subtleties, to interpret patterns, and to infer intent even when none is explicitly stated. The ring was doing exactly that. By simply existing in the jewelry box, it posed questions. What does it signify? Why is it here? Was it placed with intention? Or is it merely a relic of the past? Each possibility carried emotional resonance, and Harry's mind raced to understand, to assign meaning, to reconcile reality with expectation. Silent communication through objects is a phenomenon that spans cultures and history. Gifts, heirlooms, keepsakes, these are all mediums of nonverbal expression. They can express affection, loyalty, remembrance, or boundaries. They can mark transitions, commemorate events, or assert identity. The ring in Meghan's jewelry box was functioning in precisely this way. It spoke without sound, delivering a message that was interpreted through context, intuition, and emotion. Harry's response was complex. On one level, he experienced the personal shock of a symbol he had expected to remain central to their shared life being absent. On another level, he was confronted with a message from Meghan, communicated silently, that invited reflection, understanding, or perhaps reevaluation. He could not ignore it. His emotions were immediate: confusion, curiosity, sorrow, and a profound sense of relational inquiry. Consider the subtlety of intent. Jewelry communicates differently depending on context, placement, and association. A ring worn daily signals presence and intention. A ring stored away signals memory, perhaps reverence, sometimes distance. By placing the ring in her jewelry box, Meghan may not have intended to provoke emotion, yet the very act of storing it silently communicated something to Harry. The context amplified the meaning. It was visible enough to be noticed, private enough to demand personal interpretation. This duality, visibility and privacy, is what made the moment so emotionally charged. Harry's gaze fell upon the ring, and immediately, layers of thought and emotion collided. Was this a token from a past chapter, a relic she preserved for her own emotional grounding? Was it an intentional signal to Harry about her autonomy, boundaries, or priorities? Or was it a neutral object, significant only in the ways that memories and personal history make objects significant? The mind, confronted with ambiguity, cannot help but search for answers. The heart, confronted with the weight of emotional resonance, cannot help but respond. It's also important to note how the human brain processes symbols. A single object can act as a prism, refracting multiple emotional truths simultaneously. The ring represented the past, the present, and the potential future. It carried memory, sentiment, and subtle assertion. For Harry, understanding these layers required both emotional intelligence and self-reflection. He was not merely observing a piece of metal. He was decoding the silent language of objects, interpreting meaning where none was explicitly verbalized. Moreover, silent messages like these often bypass conscious deliberation. Harry's emotions arose before rational analysis could intervene. Tears, unease, reflection. These are instinctive responses, triggered by the intersection of symbolism, memory, and relational expectations. In that sense, the ring was extraordinarily powerful. It bypassed defense mechanisms, social filters, and rationalization, speaking directly to the heart. Silent messages also provoke questions about trust and intimacy. In relationships, we often assume transparency, that our partner's choices, particularly concerning significant objects, align with shared understanding. But the silent presence of this ring disrupted that assumption. Harry had to confront the possibility that there were dimensions of Meghan's world, emotional, historical, symbolic, that he had not fully known. The jewelry box, once a repository of shared objects, became a mirror reflecting hidden layers of identity and attachment. And yet, the beauty of silent communication is that it allows space for interpretation, reflection, and dialogue. The ring did not dictate conclusions, it invited them. It created emotional and cognitive tension, a gentle but insistent prompt to notice, consider, and understand. It opened a pathway into relational introspection, forcing Harry to navigate not only the symbolism of the object, but also his own reactions to it. By the end of the evening, Harry was left with more questions than answers. The ring had spoken volumes without uttering a word. It had revealed the complexity of human attachment, the subtle ways in which objects can convey meaning, and the depth of emotional nuance embedded in relationships. He was emotionally stirred, intellectually engaged, and profoundly aware that something fundamental had shifted. And yet, the silent message of the ring was only the beginning. As Harry would come to realize in the following days, the ring was not just an isolated symbol. It was part of a broader narrative, a story woven of memory, identity, and unspoken communication that would challenge assumptions, provoke reflection, and ultimately illuminate truths about love, trust, and connection that were as deep as they were unexpected. Some moments in life are quiet, almost mundane, yet they have the power to trigger a storm of emotion that feels uncontrollable. For Prince Harry, the discovery of the mysterious ring in Meghan's jewelry box was one of those moments. It didn't happen with fanfare or confrontation. There was no raised voice, no dramatic scene. Just the quiet presence of a small, silent object. And suddenly, the emotional ground beneath him began to shift. Harry had always been in touch with his emotions. That sensitivity had been both a gift and a challenge, especially given the intense scrutiny and expectations surrounding his life. He could process joy, sorrow, frustration, and love with depth and immediacy. But that night, as he confronted the unexpected presence of the ring, all the emotions he had tucked neatly into routines, into public appearances, into private resilience, surged at once. It was like a dam breaking, a flood of feelings that he hadn't realized were contained until they erupted. Tears came first, quiet and unannounced, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within. They weren't tears of anger, though anger was present in small flickers. They were tears of bewilderment, of hurt, of the subtle but unmistakable ache of perceived distance and intimacy. The missing wedding ring he had given Meghan represented his love, his commitment, and his personal investment in their shared life. Its absence, coupled with the presence of another ring, acted like a needle piercing a balloon, releasing emotions that had been quietly building for months, perhaps years. The emotional avalanche didn't stop with sorrow. Confusion followed swiftly, a relentless mental process attempting to decipher meaning, intent, and implications. Was the ring simply a sentimental keepsake from another time? Was it a signal, conscious or unconscious, about priorities or boundaries? Or was it a neutral object, significant only in ways Harry had not considered? The mind, confronted with ambiguity and symbolism, races to construct explanations, to impose order on what is essentially unresolved and complex.